How's everything? I think you've been away working on a project, unless you can't talk about it.
Well, here's what I can say. I have been in England shooting a picture for Robert Zemeckis called Here, starring Tom Hanks and Robin Wright.
Oh, right, right. I I read about this 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Was it
Mhm.
that? Yeah, okay. Um, and I remember I read about it, and I'm just trying to figure out what was it about, and I was really fascinated by it. What is it called? Adhere?
Here,
Adhere?
Here, based on a graphic novel by the same title.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that now. Now I remember. Yes. I'm a huge, huge Zemeckis fan. Like I mainly started off as a Spielberg fan, but as you know, their relationship and the work
Mhm.
that they do, I mean, I'm crazy about Zemeckis' work, the way. And then I obviously, growing up watching Forrest Gump and Contact, at the time, I wasn't really into making films. And then when I, became more familiar with it and got into this industry myself, I realized that how some of his most masterful work, you're the man behind it. So thank you so much. The visual, the visual environment that you create. And I remember being familiar with your work, not knowingly it was you. The first time I noticed it, I remember wanting to see Contact. And that amazing shot of the steady cam coming up the stairs, the young Jodie Foster's character running
Mhm.
at it and the mirror, and then that mirror open, it just blew me away. And that was like my first introduction to your
Yeah,
work.
yes.
Um,
Well, I'm fortunate that I've been able to work with Zemeckis and several other very creative directors who come up with these ideas, and give us challenge all of us to accomplish, the vision that's going on in their heads.
yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of go back now, how did you get started in doing what you do now? Like, how did you get into film and how did you get into cinematography?
Well, we go all the way back to high school, um, where I became, very excited about photography in general. I took a
Hmm.
black and white still photography class in high school. I had a wonderful teacher, and as soon as you get that first 8 by 10 to develop, I think it just grabs you. And so I was fascinated by that and fascinated by imagery and creating imagery. And then ultimately started making Super 8 movies in high school where, you took those images and you cut them together and you made a movie out of it.
Mm.
And so I knew that was just something that I had to figure out how to make a living doing something that was involved in filmmaking and photography. So after high school, I eventually got to Art Center College of Design, which had a major in film, so I could get a bachelor's of arts degree majoring in film. And so it was really just a passion to try to figure out how and where and why and get yourself into an industry. Now I grew up in Los Angeles, so I wasn't far from Hollywood, but I didn't know anybody.
Mm.
And my parents had one friend who was also a cinematographer. And so literally kind of meeting him, seeing what he did, and he specialized in, action oriented things. He worked on the movie Grand Prix, did a lot of the
Okay.
automobile racing sequences in Grand Prix. And so, he after that, he was shooting Porsche commercials and seemed like he was traveling the world and he loved what he did. And so it inspired me to kind of go that direction. And so once I got into college and studied film, I just had a knack for cinematography. It's like I shot everybody's student movies that were being made at the school at the time. you know,
Right.
I had some innate ability to shoot, to compose a frame, the understanding of the camera itself and how it exposed film, so that was always the direction. It was always about cinematography. I didn't, in my wildest dreams, ever think that I would become the director of photography of Forrest Gump. But I certainly had desires to pursue a career in the industry. My way in was action and sports. And I did a lot of documentary work in those categories first, which led into the second units, the action sequences in movies. Worked for a great action director for 10 years, doing all kinds of big second units. And that's ultimately how I met Bob Zemeckis, was shooting the second units on Back to the Future 2 and 3. And Death Becomes Her. And that's where our relationship began. So, from the time I kind of started school to the time that I shot Forrest Gump was probably a 15-year period of development, shall we say, to get to the point where I was capable of shooting that movie.
That's really good to know, because I mean, you mentioned about working on documentaries, and you said it was like sports. And what was the other genre that you were doing?
Well, action adventure, documentaries. I got involved with people that climb mountains, some of the world's best, and shot documentaries about them. And I shot documentaries about the natural predation of sharks for National Geographic. I shot lots of sports documentaries leading up to the Olympics. So, you got into that group of, in that era was 16 millimeter cameras. You had your own camera, and,
right.
have camera will travel, and you kind of get on the list of being able to operate a camera and, follow skiers down the hill, or race cars or motorcycles or things that moved fast, and you had to have the operating ability to keep up and understand what was going on. So that's kind of your way in, and so the sports action led into the action units of movies and being able to shoot those.
That's incredible. And the reason I asked you that, because I'm not a cinematographer. I mean, I can shoot with a camera and everything whenever I need to, but I normally have a DP myself. But I direct documentaries, and my documentaries are feature narrative documentaries, and they're not obviously the nature of what you have done. And I'm right now, it's not something that I planned on doing. I never planned on making documentaries. I always was into making stuff like Spielberg does, or like narrative films. And now I'm at that point where I'm trying to figure out how to transition from that into the narrative film world. Yes, you can write your own script, which is one route, but just trying to figure that path out. So when you said that, it kind of just, rang a little bell in my head.
So, yeah, I mean, listen, it's all about images that support the narrative, right? Whether you're making a documentary film or a dramatic narrative film, you still are telling a story. And so once you get your narrative figured out, then it's the best images possible to support those ideas. And so my work in documentaries, where it was either live sports in essence, or, climbing mountains in Venezuela, the storytellers that I worked for when I was doing that were, ever as much as creative as Robert Zemeckis, in essence. The difference is you're hanging off the side of a mountain and you've got the story unfolding in front of you, and you've got to figure out how to get the audience to understand what's going on here, right? So in climbing, it's A, you got to get the camera in position. B, you got to make it vertical and appear how vertical it really is and how difficult the journey is for the climbers. And then ultimately, if it's raining, you got to get the cameras out and shoot in the rain. Otherwise, it never happened, right? And so you get that, standing on your feet with the camera and saying, what shots do I need right now to tell this story? And especially when I was shooting Olympic athletes, the event's going to happen. So, you're standing in the middle of it and you're going, okay, I need to see the shots, guys coming out of the gate. And I need to get the shot of the clock, and I need to get the shot of the people watching them as they're going by. And I need to get shots of this that happened and that happened. So that training, I think was a great experience for me to not be intimidated by a day's work that's on a call sheet.
Yeah.
Right? Because
It,
most of that I can figure out before the day. Not everything, because it's organic process. Things happen, things
sure.
change. There's, have to make it happen on the given day that you're shooting. And so there are audibles at the line, shall we say. So you got to be ready for that. But I think all that documentary experience gave me a really good footing to always feel comfortable with change.
And you're so right about that mindset of being able to capture all that's happening in real time, because I always, when I talk to my my crew and even myself in my head, just to reinforce that we have to, like, when you're doing documentary, especially of a real time moment, you have to have like eyes in the back of your head, like a ninja. Like
Right.
you literally have to think about what I need to capture while this 30-second thing is happening, and how am I going to do it, and enough time on one shot, etc., etc. Or you can just sort of pan along with it, follow the action.
Right.
But I have to tell you that one of the documentaries that I made 3 years ago, it wasn't shot on any amazing camera or anything, because the nature of the documentary was hidden camera and GoPro and all that stuff in a refugee detention center. And it was, me and my co-director, we both watched your stuff before we went on making it. And that's pretty much, I think I was watching it at a screening yesterday, 2 days ago, and rewatching it. I'm like, just looking at a frame, because a wide frame tells so much of a story as opposed to you cutting away. And that's something that you are so masterful at, with Zemeckis, of course, as well, right?
Mhm.
That you are letting the action flow into the frame, and you're just following it, and you're panning very slowly instead of cutting back and forth. And it immerses the audience in so much. You've done that so much in What Lies Beneath and Castaway. How is that something that you sit down with Zemeckis and process it through, or is that something, like on your own, or how's that collaboration that takes place?
Oh, it's definitely a collaboration. Bob he loves that part of it. I mean, he loves, figuring out, how we're going to shoot a scene. And a lot of times he'll come in with his, what he's thinking. And then he'll flip it right over and go, so what are you thinking? I mean, he wants to engage
Yeah.
myself, but also actors, everybody else in the process of telling the story. And so he's always got a game plan of how he wants to do something, but he is open to suggestion and ideas of how to make it better. And so we've been together a long time. And I think the reason for that is that it's not as much of a struggle for him to communicate with me
Hmm.
what he's trying to say and how he wants to do it. And I think that I understand Bob, and I understand the movie he's trying to make. So the collaboration is, I'll say, well, Bob, what I was thinking is that if we start here and the door opens up and the camera starts going down the walkway and we see the shadow of something peeking out around the corner, and then the camera reveals, the subject, and he'll say, yeah, but what I thought you were going to say is, and then he'll take that thought and he'll make it better. He'll take it and go, yeah, but then wouldn't it be great if, when we came around the corner, this is what we saw? Because the audience is going to be thinking we're going to see this. But how about if we come around the corner and we see that? And you go, wow, yeah, that's pretty great, Bob. Yeah, let's do that. So it's that kind of collaboration that is, you don't get it with everybody. You don't click like that on
Yeah.
those levels with everybody. So I think that the relationships that I have in the movie business, where it's, you go back again and again and again. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I think that the work ultimately can get better and better as
Yeah,
you understand each other more along the process. Because
sure.
the great part about it is that you know the great directors will always open up to the team to see if there's a better way, see if there's more to it. Because when you look at his films, from Minimum Focus to Infinity, everything in that frame is telling the story.
100%. That's what I love
And
about it.
yeah,
The shot. Now, you might think I'm overstating this, but I'm not. What lies beneath the final sequence upstairs, that bathroom, the hallway, the bedroom, to me, and without any dialogue, it's probably the best sequence of a thriller I have ever seen. Like I even watched it yesterday, and I knew what was gonna happen. Like I've seen it so many times, but I was still on the edge of my seat. It's so crazy how you guys created that entire sequence without any dialogue, and and that goes to show, and that immerses the audience. And so I like I said, I mean, I can't overstate this. It's some of the most incredible work in cinema is done by Robert Zemeckis, and obviously, your collaboration with him. So love that sequence. And and I imagine the house that was in What Lies Beneath was a set that you guys built. Especially, I kind of figured that out. I think I did, was when the camera goes underneath
under the
Michelle
floor.
Pfeiffer's character and the
Yeah,
ground. Yeah,
it was under the floor. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, the house was built for the movie. And there's several scenes in it where, like that one, where literally, I would get involved with the construction coordinator and say, "Hey, listen, can we run the floor joists the wrong way? Basically, can we run them this way? Because I need the crane arm and the lever head. I needed to get it down under the floor, so I need the floor joist to be like this, so I can actually get the camera down there, and we can pull out the floor and then visually put it back in later." So you get to plan those movies out, especially that because it's such a Hitchcockian style thriller that you get to plan those things
yeah,
out. And so what Bob is so good at, not only can he come up with these ideas for these shots or what he wants to do, you also have to convince the actors that that's what they need to do, right? And you got two big stars. You got Michelle Pfeiffer, you got Harrison Ford, and they're going to have ideas about what their character is going to do. So he's very good about getting them involved and rehearsing those scenes, because it's not something we can just do on the day. We got to rip
yeah,
this wall out. We got to pull these floor joists out. We got to do that shot. And then, by the way, we got to do something else while we're putting it all back together in another room. So you have to figure all that stuff out. But if you have a director that is pushing the envelope to do shots like that, then you can figure it out. You can figure out how to do those shots. Now, the one thing that I think is fascinating is the bathroom. Okay, now we had three bathtub sets,
I figured. Yeah,
right? And we laid it out so that I had the crane arm in essence in the middle, and then I had one bathroom here, and then I had one bathroom on each side, so that
yeah,
we had this bathtub because the camera had to get down to water level, so it had to be really big on one side, so the camera had place to get and so to be placed, and so each bathtub had a shot. So we had different designs of bathtub to get all the different shots, and it was laid out in a way that we could do all that. The bathroom itself, when he carries her in and puts her in the tub,
yeah.
walkway from the hallway to the tub is about 30% longer than it is in the original bathroom. So the walk became a longer walk to that bathtub. Every time we went back in there in that sequence, we started with light gray walls, and by the time we finished, we have very dark gray walls. I think it was gray. So it always kept the room getting darker and darker and darker as we progressed through there. we built the house so that nothing lined up like a normal house would. Everything was a little off. So that was always easy to find a place where you could get the camera going past something and revealing something. So it always lent to this idea of, something going on in this house. I remember saying to him, Bob, this move is so slow. Do you want should we do another one? Just pick up the pace a little bit, so we have that in the bank, it may just die on the vine. And he's like, nope, that's perfect. That's the one right there. And he was so right, so right. It's so terrifying. And that's just, it's a genre, and understanding the genre and understanding, what the camera needs to do. And for me, it was a blast. I loved it because, there's so much it's a character in the movie. The camera is a character in the movie.
It is.
And so, figuring out how to pull off all those camera moves with a big crane arm inside the house. And so, by design, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, no, it certainly was. And how did you guys do the pickup truck sequence at the end when the camera is on Michelle Pfeiffer and it goes underneath the vehicle and then you see the shoe falling out?
Right.
I'm assuming what was the process of that? I'm assuming it had a lot of digital composition to it, but I just wanted to find out from you.
Yeah, so the shot starts out. I remember I had to build a lot of different rigs for that one sequence.
Mhm.
When the pickup truck and the boat pull out of the house, out of the driveway, I mounted a camera. I built a vertical dolly track on the insert car, which was difficult because you can't go under bridges or anything. So you got to build it on the location, and you got to know exactly where you're going to drive it because it's not a crane arm booming down. The shot needed to be straight vertical to come down as the pickup truck came close, and then ultimately it goes underneath, and and the shoe comes out, and wait a minute, they're not alone. And so it's kind of like, there's so many shots in that film that took a special rig to do the individual shot, that it's not something you can cover and then figure out in the editing room how to piece it all together. You really have to get the shot when you're shooting it, because there's no other shot. That's the shot. That's the way the sequence. Bob will sit down and he'll talk it through. A lot of times you'll have a storyboard artist, that's drawing the keyframes, so we can discuss ultimately how to execute the concept and figure it all out.
Right.
What's going to be digital? What can we actually do for real? To get that, it was a lot to getting that truck from the house to the lake. Put it that way.
Yeah. I'm so glad you guys shot What Lies Beneath on anamorphic, because I have a 32-inch anamorphic monitor, and
Oh wow.
I didn't remember it was anamorphic, so I started watching like, yes, and it just gives you so much, and it makes sense now that why you guys did it, because it just gives you so much to work with, so much depth, and in the frame, so much action is happening, which was great. So I just want to let you know that was really, really cool that you guys did.
Right. I think it's a really good format for that genre because it allows you to do a lot of storytelling in the frame at eye level. Right. So wherever the character is and whatever you're creeping along, it gives you a good composition on the subject, but yet all this other frame you can use for the spooky stuff. Yeah, it works great.
Yeah. And so you guys, before you guys started production on What Lies Beneath, you did half of Castaway, more or less half of Castaway, for which Tom Hanks had gained weight, and then you guys went into production for What Lies Beneath, and then you went back by the time he lost weight for the remaining part of the film. How was that? Because one of the things I really loved about Castaway, and I wanted to know from your own experience, so the character goes through this whole thing, a journey of, as you show in the film in the very beginning, it's like, boom, 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 TikTok, TikTok, like very, very fast paced, FedEx and delivery, and
Right.
everything is
Yeah.
about time. Everything is about time. And even
Yeah.
on a set like Castaway or any other film, everything is very, very crunch, right? And then
Yeah.
then he goes on the island where all he has is time. And
Right.
obviously you guys were there too.
Yes.
Working in that environment versus in, an environment where you normally work, did you feel something more of at ease too in terms of as a, just pretty much just not going as in boom, boom, boom like the character did? Or was it something different?
Well, um, by design, we were only we always kind of we set rules for ourselves at certain parts of the movie, like what lenses we're going to use, what camera speeds we're going to use, how we're going to light it. So on the island, it became about no diagonal pans. Everything had to be horizontal or vertical
Mm,
in the way the camera moves were laid out. So, in essence, if the movie is about cast away, in essence, the excess baggage in your life that you don't need, and you simplify it down to what the essence of life really is and what's important, the camera is doing the same thing. So it gets as simple as you ever see the two of us ever shoot on that island to kind of, in essence, put the audience with the character. I mean, ideally, if you're always approaching your narrative that you're going to put the audience with the main character of the scene or the movie,
mhm.
then that's what you want. That's what works. That what keeps the audience connected, I think, to the story, and and
100%.
and it becomes more subjective than, in essence, objective. And I think that's a really important thing to keep people engaged in your movie. And
Yeah.
so if you break it down to Castaway, there he is, man, 55 minutes on an island with a volleyball, ultimately. Um, and in the movie, there's no music.
Yeah. Until when he leaves the island, when he makes it to the ship.
And it could be one of the most powerful notes of music you ever hear
I
because,
agree.
and it wasn't Bob's intent originally to do that, but they kept trying things and nothing worked. And then finally he said, I'll tell you what's working. No music, right? That's a pretty ballsy move to have, nothing going on except a guy trying to survive on his own with nobody to talk to until, he creates Wilson. But it's so powerful in the movie because it's ultimately that was the way to do it. But sometimes, you got to find these things along the way, it starts
Yeah.
talking to.
And I remember when I watched in the movie theater and I came home, and that's when I found out and I read that the music doesn't kick in until he leaves the island. I didn't even notice it. That's how great it was. Like I
Right.
didn't even pick up on it when the music did come in. That, oh,
Yeah.
the music finally came in. So that's, and then all of that kind of, like the collaboration, right? Like editing, performance, cinematography, direction, everything kind of just, and I think that the waves had a lot to do with it. Like when you constantly hear water
Right.
waves, to me, maybe that was like a way of music, just
Right.
listening to nature.
Yep.
But yeah, no, another phenomenal film that you guys worked on together, Castaway. And what was the biggest challenge that you faced being on the island that you probably didn't normally don't face, being in an environment where it's more controlled? Because the Zemeckis like to work in more controlled environment as opposed to,
Oh yeah.
anywhere.
We'll never get him
How was
out there again.
that? Did you
You
guys have a
know,
tough time?
well, yeah, sure. Anytime you go,
Yeah,
you go to a remote island that's, an hour boat ride from mainland.
yeah.
Um, he he's very driven with his ideas, and ultimately, every time you go outside, it's a compromise because the weather's going to be what the weather's going to be, and we had major storms that hit us, and we had people, getting seasick, and we had, people getting sunstroke, and we had people, you take all those people out there, and, I do my best to try to pick people that are capable of working in those elements. I've spent my whole career working in those elements. So I know what it takes, but you got to get 100 people that are capable of doing that. And it's not easy. People think they could, I don't get seasick because they've been on a boat on a lake. They've never actually been in the ocean before, and it's really, I feel sorry for people that get seasick. It's the worst. But that's what happens when you have that big, I think between the sickness and this people getting seasick, but that kind of, once you get to land, you're fine. But we had I don't know what it was, but it went through the crew, and we lost half the crew after this big storm.
Oh, wow.
So we were literally down to a skeleton crew. I was operating the camera, and the first AD was sick, the camera operator was sick, all the way down the list. So there was just a small group of us actually, doing probably a week's worth of that movie, which is the way Bob always saw it in his own mind anyway. He was like, all I want is 15 people on the island. I don't want 100 people.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Because he's doing the same thing. He's trying to cast away all that baggage of turning around on a movie set to 100 people staring at him going, what are we going to do next, Bob? You know what I mean?
No.
I
actually thought it would be like 30, 40 people. So it's news to me that it was 100 people and it went down to 15 for a week.
Yeah, because because in the script it says, and then the wind changes direction. Right? How do you do that with 15 people, right? And the storm begins. You know what I mean? So there's elements of Zemeckis that are in the movie that the only way you can do it is with 100 people. Now, there's a lot of the movie where it's Tom sitting there on the beach and he's opening all the packages, and he comes across the FedEx package. Yeah, you'd only need 15 people for that. I mean, but what we learned was that the way to get early morning shots and late light and all that stuff we love to do is to have the 15 people living on a boat at the island. And so we did that. So we had our 15 people, and we would shoot, we'd go over in the dark and we'd shoot at sunrise, and we would shoot, probably 2 hours before the crew showed up on the big catamaran. And the same thing at the end of the day, they'd have to get on the catamaran and they'd have to go home, and then we would shoot till dark, and then we'd go back, to the boat we were living on. So in some ways he did get to his 15 people. But, there's just, there's the island was in the Fijian chain called Monoriki, and the tides were so drastic that you would set up, let's say you had 15 shots that day. I needed a crew to set up the shot we were doing first. And while we were doing that, they were setting up the next shot. So I had another crew setting up the next shot, because it might be out in the water. And you knew that the tide was coming in or going out, depending upon where we were in the cycle.
Sure.
So you knew that in all those 15 shots, different locations that we had to be on the island, you knew when you needed to be where. So you knew you had, okay, I know the tide's going to be here, and we got to get this shot by this time to get to the next shot, and then get to the next shot. So you had to figure out your whole day and where you're going to be at what time of day, because otherwise the water's going to be up to here, or there isn't any water, right? So the beach, all of a sudden, it's like, where's the beach? Oh, it'll be here in about 2 hours. Once the tide turns, it starts going out. So you had to put that into the schedule too. So those were the challenges of, when you go out and you actually try to attempt to shoot a dramatic film in a location like that. And I think that's why, those kinds of things of, let's do it with 15 people. I grew up, in the independent filmmaking world, right? I started that way with 15 was our big crew, right? So, I know how to do that. But, I said, Bob, we can do it, but you're going to be here probably about 6 weeks longer than you want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
That's not, he wants to get the shooting part done as most efficiently as he possibly can and get into the editing room. I mean, his love of filmmaking is writing and then editing. Right. The shooting part of it to him is the most frustrating part of the process.
Well, it goes back to again that controlled environment. Editing is a
Control,
controlled environment.
right? It's control of making your movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I was talking to you probably know Kim. He shot Welcome to Marvin.
mhm,
Yeah, I was
mhm.
talking to him last week,
Yeah,
and we were talking about this, that how editing is, for some people, it's like the play. For a lot of directors, it's the place they look forward to, that whether because they're introvert or whether they like control environments or whatever that is. It's just
right,
like, you're away from the rest of the world, especially coming from a set. When you're working with like 150 people, you need that
right,
break to be
right.
away from everybody.
Yeah.
um and I'm just gonna go over to Contact, which I'd rather not talk in detail at this point, but just that film alone, when you get a script, you go through it. What was your reaction of that film, the way it ended when you read the script?
Yeah, it was so long ago, and so
Okay,
because
bad
there
question.
were, yeah, well, no, but I'll tell you why. Because they had wanted Bob to make that movie years before he made it,
Oh,
and
okay.
and and Bob said, "Yeah, but it has to end like this." And they said, "Yeah, no, we don't want to do that." And so it went away, and eventually George Miller ended up with it for a long time. And he got to a certain point, and are you going to make the movie, George? And they're like, he goes, "No, I need another year of development, And they're like, "No, we got to make this movie now." And they went back to Bob, and he said, "Yeah, but here's the ending." And they were like, "Okay." In essence, they had to agree to make the movie that, with the
Yeah,
ending he believed in. And so
that's
in the
that makes
book, of
sense.
course, it's a much more definitive ending that there is intelligent
Yeah.
life in the universe and we're making a connection. And in Bob's version, it's up to you. It's
Okay.
it's and you're going to read it the way you want to read it, and see it the way you want to see it. In the
I think
version, go ahead.
Very cool. No, please, you go ahead. I interrupted
No, I'm saying in my mind, I'm convinced Ellie made the journey. Right. To me, I'm perfectly fine with that version of what happened. Um, so that, but I think that's the filmmaker trying to make it, you know, make people think and make people commit to what they believe, and what they see in the film. I
you.
mean,
Yeah. And
listen,
that,
I mean, he's tackling, is there intelligent life in the universe? Is there a God? Right? It's like all these huge questions that Hollywood likes to avoid. You know,
yeah. Yeah.
and people, having to figure that out for themselves.
And that's what was so thought-provoking about that film. For me, I remember when because I think it came out 97, so it was a year after Independence Day came out, all those Mars attacks, all those alien movies that were coming out. So I
Right.
remember when she sees that figure approaching her, in like a waving design. I was like, please let it not be like, squiggly aliens coming around. But I had no idea what was going to come out of there. And and it was just done again, done so masterfully. And what really sucks about that year was I think Contact didn't really make much headlines, was because Titanic did, because Titanic came out in, I
Oh,
think,
was
in
that same
December.
year?
Yeah, yeah. And Men in Black came out the same year too, and those two films came out. I think that came Men in Black and came out in July,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Titanic came out in
I think
December.
Jodie got nominated, and that was about it. I don't know if there was much else. But I can
Yeah,
tell
but it
you,
wasn't, because
out of all the films
everybody
that
was
I've
talking
done,
about Titanic.
right, out
Yeah.
of all the films that I've done, by far the most difficult film I've ever shot.
Why is
Hands
that?
there, um, technically, it was so complicated.
Okay.
If you turn off the sound and you watch that movie silently, you will see probably the most beautifully designed transitions in any film that's ever been made. Every one of
I
those,
gotta do that.
every one of those, the transitions from one scene to the next, it's so well thought out. It's so Bob in his way of weaving the story. And there's a lot of wonders in that movie that nobody notices because they're very organic, and Bob has a way of making it, you say, oh, that's a 3 minute scene. And by the way, that's all one shot. It is? Really? Then people have to go back and look at it. So I shot it in half the movie's Panavision 65 millimeter. Half the
Okay.
movie was shot anamorphic, plus all the VistaVision shots that needed to be done at that time. So at that time, you got to remember that you needed a larger negative to keep the quality of the visual effects work up to, I think, release quality level. And so getting the 65 Panavision camera to shoot a lot of it. And basically I could still put that in a remote head and move the camera like Bob likes to move the camera. You can't do that with a VistaVision camera. A sound blimp VistaVision camera is, the size of your grandfather's Buick, as I always say, or my grandfather's Buick. It was enormous. So with the Panavision 65 camera gave us that camera mobility that we were used to, and then ultimately released in 35 anamorphic. So all the visual effects work, I think, is first rate, and the blending of shots, which we were doing, we did a lot of blends in that movie back then, where Jodie Foster, for instance, here's a signal. She comes racing in the car, and the camera starts up high in the air, and the camera comes down, and she jumps out of the car, and the camera follows her into the building, and
Yeah.
then makes a couple of turns and goes through some doors. There's a blend there, and then you pick it up running up the stairs and into the office, which is on a soundstage in Hollywood. Now, we did that several times in the film. When she's a child at the beginning, and the camera starts outside the house, seeing the house that she lives in, it comes up, it goes through the window down the hallway and into her bedroom where her dad is reading her a story. Once again, a blend, right? Arecibo was a translite in one shot and the actual real Arecibo in the other shot. And you never notice that one's a translite and one's the actual real Arecibo. So those kinds of challenges came up for me every day, and especially the shot that you mentioned earlier, where the father's had a heart attack, the popcorn is splayed out on the carpet, and she comes into frame. And by the way, if you look at the way the popcorn is laying on the floor, it's actually a constellation. so
Ah,
So, the detail, it's unbelievable. So then, she gets up and goes to the stairs. So it was a Steadicam shot. It was shot with the
yeah.
Bowman VistaVision Steadicam. It's a Beaumont. It took 400-foot loads. The 400-foot Arri magazine sat sideways on the body that they developed. And so you had a VistaVision camera that was light enough to go on a Steadicam. And then, of course, the camera goes up the stairs. Now, on the set for that shot, the stairs are flopped and they're actually on the other side. So as you go back and look at
Okay.
it, you'll see that in the house, because you'll see it at the funeral, stairs are on one side, but in that shot, they're already flopped. So you go up the stairs, you're on the other side. So the whole thing ultimately is a reflection in the mirror in the bathroom. So it's a reflection shot at, ultimately. And then of course, figuring out we had to ramp the camera speed because back then it wasn't post ramps. We did the ramp and when
That's
we got,
right.
yeah. And so the idea was that the Steadicam and the camera had to leave the girl and the camera had to ramp the camera speed. So what it feels like is she can't get to her destination. It's like impossible for her to get there. So
Yeah,
that was the
yeah.
feeling he was trying to get to the audience, that she didn't get there fast enough to get to the medicine to save her dad. And then
One of the
ultimately,
things I noticed in that, sorry, go on.
no, I say then the medicine chest closes, then you see the reflection of
Yeah,
her
yeah,
dad on the wall, and then it blows out and it becomes a funeral.
yeah. One of the things I noticed in that shot, tell me if I'm looking into it too much, because sometimes that happens with me when I watch something over and over again. When she comes up the stairs and she's in the first part of the hallway, and then all of a sudden the light changes. Now, was that intentional in terms of a visual story representation, or is that just something that happened, or am I looking into it too much?
When the camera turns, it goes down the hallway, and she's chasing the
No, when
camera.
the camera, yeah, when the camera moves up and she comes up the stairs, it's a little bit darker, and then all of a sudden you have these tungsten light that kind of just lits her up, and the camera moves away from her. Was that intentional in terms of lighting, or was that just something that I'm looking into too much, or that occurred, or?
I'd have to look at it. I don't remember. I mean, we're doing a speed ramp at that point, right? So the
Right.
iris is opening up as the camera
Oh, okay.
cranking faster. So that might have some feeling of that. And then, of course, the light in the hallway is, a little bit more dramatic to feel the sense of movement in space. So, separating the lights, so
Right.
there's light. Um, so, to create the drama in the shot, I'd have to think about it, but that's all that I remember.
That's okay. No, I know it's been a long time, but like obviously you don't
The
see those
fact that
films over
people
and over
still
again.
want to talk about, that movie. I love that. I mean, I went to the BSC Awards in London and I sat with this guy who was a cinematographer, a younger cinematographer. And, we sat there for a while around the table and everybody got to know everybody a little bit. And then finally, towards the end, he goes, listen, I can't let you leave this table until I ask you this one question. And of course, it was about content. So the fact that people still want to talk about it is great. Is great. I love that.
I honestly I can talk to you about Contact all day long. Like that's how much I love that movie, every bit of it, and especially that hearing scene at the end. That was that intimidating to have that kind of a setup in that big room with so much crowd and managing all that. Not intimidating in the sense that you've never done that before, but just that mammoth of a scene and such a climax. Was that in any way difficult to tackle?
It was in Washington, D.C. It's one of those great big giant rooms. Fortunately, it had
Yeah,
windows on both sides. And I think that my gaffer, Steve McGee, who was with me through all those big movies, just a wonderful, wonderful gaffer. I said, listen, I want the key to be on this side and the fill to be on this side. And I think we got to light up all these windows, so it was like, all right, I'm putting 18Ks out there all the way, and I'm putting 12Ks over there all the way. And we'll put some, up here for the backlight. And I'm like, okay, good luck with that. It's like, it was a monstrous lighting setup because it's a huge room and a lot of people. And you wanted them to be chiseled out in that environment, especially Jody.
yeah,
And I came up with this idea that when we would push into Jody, instead of pushing straight into her, that we pushed on a diagonal. I had this whole thing about the universe and the rotation and all this going on, and a lot of things that I did in the film. And that was the one place where I could start on one side of her, and as I pushed in, I would, push to the other side as we pushed in tighter and tighter and tighter. So the whole background behind her rotates behind her in those close-ups as we push into her. And so, Bob was like, yeah, love that. Great, let's do it. He saw it and he thought it was working. As he says, yeah, that's talking to me. So we did that, and that was kind of fun. But it's kind of having, I think, a filmmaker that can communicate with the people around him, and then give them the freedom to take it and come up with ideas like that, and run it by him. To kind of like always try to do something that's going to give more depth to the story, and to the viewing audience watching the film.
Yeah. It's like giving ownership, right, to people who you're working with, like, and then they put more effort and more time and more thought process behind it because the captain of the ship has believed in them. Um,
Yeah,
and 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 again, what I'm so I kind of realized that I think, let's see, I probably didn't realize it when I saw Contact, the difference between, like, a wide shot, what the message that gives versus a close-up shot. I mean, that was 26 years ago. But over the last decade or so, I have come to appreciate that how much, especially after watching Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, like David Lean kind of an approach. And that's what Robert Zemeckis and your work reminds me of, that you just, especially the adhering scene. If it was, the easiest thing could have been, okay, let's just do a medium close up here, cut away, that's it, the end. But to show that entire room in its entirety and to have proper lighting coming in, it just spoke so much to the story, like what was at stake at that scene, like how she was the
right,
only person,
right,
believing in herself and nobody else cared. Like,
right,
so yeah,
right.
really masterful work, really masterful work. I
And
would love to deconstruct contract contact with you more sometime if you're up for it.
sure, sure. I mean, Bob did in that scene what he's done since his very first movie is he has this, he'll take a television screen, right, in the back of the room, right? There's this TV monitor set up. So you'll see this master shot, this huge room with all these people.
Yeah,
And then down in the frame, you'll see on the TV screen a close up of Jodie. So,
yeah,
so yeah. And so, and we did that in the film several times, like when she's in the White House press room and she thinks she's going to speak on behalf of what's happened, and Clinton's in the scene. Clinton never
yeah. I
knew he was
remember
in,
that.
Clinton never knew he was in the scene, but in the movie he's in the scene. And so Bob's sleight of hand was you see Jodie in the press room with monitors, and you see Clinton on the monitor, right? So it's Clinton. And so then when it's her time to get up and she walks, the camera goes with her, only to see, in essence, Clinton walk out of the room. And that's the sleight of
Yeah,
hand part of that shot, because it's not Clinton walking out of the room. It's a double, because you just see the back of his
right,
head and
right.
it's gone, but you see it in the close up. So you really get the feeling that they're really there.
He
They're in
was
the
in
White
it.
House press room, and this is happening. And I love that. I love that cinema sleight of hand, to convince an audience that something's happening.
You certainly convinced me for the longest time. I discovered that 10 years ago that that wasn't the case. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
really worked. It really worked. And one thing I wanted to ask you, so you worked with Zemeckis on Back to the Future as second unit and Death Becomes Her.
Mhm.
There was a transition in his approach of creating a visual image or story visually. I think it changed from Death Becomes Her to Forrest Gump very gently, and then it took in my view, it took a big leap from that on to Contact, because Contact was the most different shot film he has ever done, or at least you have ever worked with, because it was a little bit different than Forrest Gump too. So was there that time period in between Forrest Gump, Death Becomes Her, and Contact where you guys, collaborated to kind of come up with this approach, or was it like a very organic thing that happened with Contact?
I would say that um, I really caught Bob at his like non-editing phase.
Mm,
So in essence, he kind of had the confidence in himself and his ability to believe in the screenplay, to believe in the words and the structure of it, and to believe that he could judge a performance with the actors that he's cast. Because so much of it is done in the shot where there's no coverage, there's no way
yeah.
to fix it. And I think that that's, to me, I just happen to catch him at that. Now, for a cinematographer, it doesn't get any tougher, right? Because that camera's going to push into that close up from, in essence, a master. And you got to
Yeah.
light that close up and you got to figure out how to do that. You know, when I think what I learned in that phase was when the camera is moving, the lights can move too, and people don't notice. You can get away with kind of, dimmers and adjusting lights and things as the camera's moving to get into that close up, to get the light where it really needs to make the person, look
Right.
proper for the shot. So, and I'm a very, sports was a big part of my life growing up. I was very athletic and certainly thought that's what my future was going to be until, you know, all those things happened to everybody in high school. It's like, okay, this is over. Everybody's
Yeah.
bigger, stronger, faster. Okay, I get it. I got to find something else to do. But I still, I love the challenge of game day. As I call it to Bob, I said, Bob, I love this. This is game day to me. This is us pulling off a shot that nobody's ever done before. And so it's terrifying and it's very rewarding. And for a director to get to his, I'll call it maturity level, where he is that good of a storyteller and believes in being able to judge performance and timing and sense of timing in the filmic world, which we know is completely different than reality.
Mm.
Is fascinating. So I love the challenge of it. And I would get hired a lot. People go, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, I can show you how to move the camera, but I can't tell you how to do the rest. You've got to convince actors
That's the
to do
Zemeckis.
this. You've got to know that this 3.5 minutes is, not going to feel like 20 minutes when you're watching the movie. You're not going to start sweating when you see it, in the editing room going, or you're watching it with an audience, because it's just, I said, that's a difficult thing. That takes, I think all that experience to figure that out and to have a sense of that, to have that kind of command on storytelling, because we all directors have their strengths and their weaknesses. They're all, some are very good writers, some are just great with actors and performance. Some design great shots, and they have a lot of razzle dazzle. I mean, there's all kinds of versions of making movies and storytelling. But if you want to do a contact, yeah, good luck. But it was for me, like I said, toughest thing I've ever done. And in some ways, I look back at those shots and I still can't believe that we actually pulled them off.
Would you consider it your most proudest work, Contact?
Well, I think from a technical standpoint, it was certainly the most difficult.
Okay.
And I think that I stand behind the work today as far as the way, what the lighting is and how we did it and what we did. So I'm still proud of it. I'm still proud of it in that regard. There's every film kind of takes on a life of its own.
Sure.
I hope that my lighting is at the end of the day honest, and it's not too, in essence, theatrical or lighting for lighting's sake. That it actually has it puts the audience, I think, in the place they need to be for the story being told. So we all
Yeah,
fight with
it does. It does.
I think we all fight with that on a daily basis when we're shooting, by the way, you only have so much time to do these things, right? You gotta get the work done too. So there's that part of it that's always going to exist. But the challenge is to try to hit those notes, and get it to feel right too, to get it to elevate the story being told at the moment.
Yeah. Speaking of lighting, one of the things that I vividly remember, not saying that other films don't, but the four films that we are just talking about, Castaway, What Lies Beneath, Forrest Gump, and Contact, they have a very natural lighting, either because it served the story or it was because in the current time period, whatever the reason was. You just never know. Sometimes you notice you're like, oh, that's a great set of lighting. Like when you start noticing things, then you're
Right,
being drifted away from the story.
right,
And that doesn't happen in those four films. I don't remember other stuff that you worked on as thoroughly as I remember those four, so I can say
right.
that with complete confidence that it just looks
Mhm.
so natural in those four films. Um, just a few more questions. Um, who's your favorite cinematographer that you sort of looked up to or you get inspired to, maybe you watch from time to time?
I think that when I was, the aspiring young cinematographer trying to get my foot in the door, I think Caleb Deschanel was one of those guys that I looked at, the Black Stallion and things like that, and just noticed how beautiful cinematography could be and how it could play in the storytelling. And I was inspired, by Laszlo Kovacs and Vilmos Zsigmond and Haskell Wexler and Owen Roisman and that all those guys, and then Jordan Cronenweth, with Blade Runner. So I think there were those
Yeah,
films that took place in the '60s that really changed the way American films looked. And I one of the compliments I got once was that my work was organic and felt like Haskell Wexler's, and that was like the biggest compliment I could ever get in life, because I've always
nice.
respected Haskell's work um, and Conrad Hall. I mean, Conrad
Amazing work
Hall,
he did.
watch his development from the professional, say, to the last one that he shot,
Road to Perdition.
Road to Perdition. Yeah. So you know, they all inspired me to want to become a cinematographer, and I really felt that it became so cinematic, and it just talked to me in a big way. So those were the guys that I tried to emulate, and I think that at the end of the day, it's your aesthetic in the way that you light something. So ultimately, I've got to like it,
Yeah,
and I get pushed by directors, to go certain ways with certain things, and I struggle with that because sometimes it pushes me out of my comfort zone of what I think it should look like.
sure.
And so I work with that, and but ultimately, it's still got to talk to me. I still got to like it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you know, it's your gut at the end of the day. You got to tell the story. You've got to see certain things in the frame, and if you're shooting a really dark movie, you still somehow there's light there. And where's that light coming from? Ultimately, same place the music's coming from. But you got to try to convince the audience, I think, that there's a reason for that light to be there.
Yeah.
And there might,
Yeah.
there might not be a realistic bone in where I place a light and how something is lit at all. But if it feels that way,
Yeah.
then and that's your gut telling you, yeah, we can get away with this, and this works, and I can see it in a way that, the audience is going to understand the story point. But yet it's could actually feel like it's real somehow.
It's incredible that it's about a feeling, right? Because in post-production, in editing as well, it's like, if somebody asks me, why did you cut here? I'm like, I have no idea. It was just a
Right,
feeling.
right, right,
I can't explain it to you. It was a feeling
right.
and I just did it. Now, whether it's right or wrong, that's a different story, but it was just a
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and what advice would you give to young cinematographers, Don?
I think the best advice that I got when I was young and starting out was shoot, shoot as much as you can. As a documentary cameraman, I shot thousands and thousands and thousands of feet of film in all kinds of situations. And I think that that's ultimately how you're going to find your voice. You're going to look at things, you're going to see things, you're going to go, why does that look so fabulous?
Yeah.
And you're just going to, all of a sudden, you're going to see a painting in a gallery and you're going to go, whoa, okay, hold on. And then you're going to analyze that painting and you're going to look at it and you're going to see where that light's coming from and why it looks so sensational. And you're going to study the composition and you're going to file all that stuff in your memory bank. And it's time in the saddle. It's time in the saddle. And ultimately, you find that you have. I think you got to have some kind of a natural ability to compose a frame and to light it. And because I came up in the independent film world and not in the studio system, I didn't learn all of the ways it was proper to do things at the time. And I think that
Sure.
that's an advantage because when the crossover happened, there were, people that would kind of scratch their head and go, you want to do what? And ultimately it was me trying things till I found, if I bounce the light off the floor here and it hits the mirror over there and it does that, look at that. Doesn't that look great?
Mm.
And they'll look at you funny and then they'll do it, and then ultimately they'll come back to you at some point and say, I've done that several times now for other people and they love it too. It's like you find things along the way that what light does, is you can't just turn the light on and aim it at something. You gotta, you can do that and look at it and go, wow, this looks terrible. And
Yeah.
there's a little bit of trial and error there. So it's really time in the saddle. It's shooting. It's shooting. I married. I had young kids. I shot everything, man. I had to take every job that was available. So because of that, it forced me to do a lot of jobs I wouldn't have done if I, didn't have to. But I guarantee you, I learned something every day I went out and shot something, no matter how horrible the job might have been.
Yeah.
I still learned something. And so it's putting that time in the saddle and shooting.
That's great. Thanks for the kind advice and thank you so much for your time, Don. I totally, this is like one of those bucket list items talking to you, and it was
Oh, great.
amazing. And I would love to talk to you more if you have time down the road about your other stuff and other projects.
Sure, absolutely. I've enjoyed it very much. I still love
Great.
the movies.
Thank you so much.
All
What
right.
was that?
I still love making movies, 40 years later. Still
Yeah,
love going to work.
I can see that in your excitement as a child that you still are deep down. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much, Don.
Take
Take care.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.